Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. As you guys know, lately I have been getting a lot of inspiration from TikTok. And what I've done is I've looked at a few people that I've gained a hell of a lot of respect for. Deborah Rayne. Deborah Rayne is a small town girl turned into big city actor who has traveled around the country doing her craft. She is one of my favorite influencers, specifically on TikTok. Miss Rayne is a self-made historian, entertainer, and critical thinker. As such, she must take the blame for the oligarchy's interest in taking down TikTok, books, wokeness, and all the rest. She takes critical thinking to another level. So without further ado, hey, Deborah Rayne, welcome to Politics Done Right.
Thank you. That might be the most epic introduction I've ever received.
Well, it is not only heartfelt, but brain felt, because before I came onto the show, I told you I was looking at some of your other TikToks, the other ones that I hadn't seen. And there's one that you did where you showed historical context that I thought was so, it was amazing. I apologize. I have to ask you, did you come up with that yourself? Because it was so damn good. And folks, by the way, Deborah is not just a history buff. She's entertaining. So it's a TikTok channel that you've got to subscribe to and listen to. Anyway, Deborah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the TikToking?
Well, as you said, I'm a small town girl born and raised in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is sort of middle America, but always had aspirations and dreams of something bigger. So I moved to New York City to pursue my acting dreams. And along the way, just became a citizen of the world, which is what happens when you're exposed to other people. Right. When you remove the isolation of a small town and you start meeting other interesting people from around the world, you hopefully absorb some of those sensibilities. And when I was on the national tour of a play, it was called The Olympic Spirit. It was celebrating the accomplishments of Jesse Owens in the Olympics. And, I saw some of the things that were happening in the deep rural parts of this country, and it was concerning. It was deeply, deeply concerning.
Well, you told me a story that, what I did is as you were telling the story, I started to smile because I knew exactly where it was going. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened with you and Jesse Owens, if you will?
So the actor that was playing Jesse Owens was obviously a young Black man. And we were on this national tour of this show, and we hit the deep rural parts of the South, deep Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas. And we would, stop along the side of the road at some of these small little local rest stops, not super developed, just kind of local places. And in my naivete, I just walked into the restaurant with my fellow actor and friend, Jamal. We just walked in together. And you could hear palpably in this little small town rest stop, the people sit up, and all eyes on a swivel looked over to the front door and watched a young white girl walk in with a young Black man. And that was the only context they had. They didn't know if we were a couple, friends, brother and sister, coworker, nothing else. But just the visual image of us existing and walking in together was enough to ruffle feathers in these small towns, plural. This was not an isolated incident. This happened repeatedly. And Jamal felt it first. He felt the hairs stand on the back of his neck, and he went, "We shouldn't use the restroom here. We don't need to be buying a soda from the vending machine here. It's not worth it. Let's go." He's like, "I'm not trying to get lynched today. Let's go." So we left. We left that place, got back in our van, and drove away. And this was in the early 2000s in the United States. This is not some far-flung black and white page out of a history book. This is my lived experience, and I'm not that old. So that is the current environment in the United States. And most white people particularly don't experience that, have never experienced that. And until you do, I don't think you have a full understanding of what's actually going on in this country.
And it is interesting because you were with a group of diverse people that you could actually see it in real time and in action. While most people just talk about it, oh, that doesn't really exist. When we have the Supreme Court justices saying we don't no longer need the voter registration or the affirmative actions or anything like that anymore, because all of that is gone, right? And the thing about it is, unless you are in a diverse environment where you can actually see these things, it is never seen. Now,
it would have never been, I would have never felt it. It would have never been projected upon me. If I would have walked into those places by myself in my whiteness, I would have never felt it. But because of my proximity to a diverse group of people, I was included, and then it was directed towards me, and I felt it palpably.
That is such an important reason why we have to be integrated and live together so that people can see these different kinds of experiences. But let me tell you, one of the things that I like about your channel is that, first of all, you don't only talk racial issues, you talk social justice issues, you talk economic justice issues, but you also do it in an amusing manner, in a colorful way, in the language that you use that we don't necessarily use on Politics Done Right. But I'm
here today
on your best behavior today. But what I love about it is that it grabs you in, and I was able to see with contents like yours and others that are similar to yours, the threat that people like you present to our oligarchy. You are, in fact, a danger. What kind of responses do you get when you talk about economic issues? I mean, recently you did a piece on, hey, MAGA, this is what this budget that Johnson just got passed in the House is going to do to you. And you know what? Anybody seeing that out of you would have stuck to that particular video, that particular short, and really learned something from it. What kind of response do you get from those?
I mean, it runs the gamut. I've gotten everything from death threats to marriage proposals. It depends on how receptive people are. And sometimes you have to deliver the message gently and with some humor and some levity for it to be absorbed, because it's a difficult thing to decenter yourself from everything that you've always been taught. You have to simultaneously zoom out and zoom in on your life at the same time. Do I honestly believe these things that I've been taught? And why do I even believe them in the first place? Why do I believe that women are delicate and can't run a marathon? Do I actually believe that? Or is that just something I've been taught my whole life? And who taught me that? Do I honestly believe that Black people are lazy? Is that true? Do I really believe that because I've observed it? Or is it just something I've been taught my whole life? So you have to look inward and really honestly evaluate your own beliefs, but then also zoom out and go, is that the patriarchy that's been telling me that? Is that white supremacy and racism that's been telling me that? Do I truly believe it? So those are difficult concepts for any of us to endeavor upon. And it's a lifetime endeavor, right? I'm always reevaluating. Why do I believe that? Is that something I've been told, or is it something I actually believe? So when we've all been told these lies about particularly our history and where we fit in it, it's hard to come to any sort of authentic, real truth about who we are and who we want to be going forward if all we have ever absorbed and heard is lies.
And the piece that I just saw of yours today, and it's an older piece that you did exactly that. You layered history. You layered the history that we were taught and the underlying histories that we weren't necessarily exposed to. And you show how that the dependency on those histories that we were never taught or not taught explicitly, how it actually changed the history in general that we're taught. And I think it is that sort of critical thinking that puts the fear of many that a platform like this, which, I mean, this is not sugarcoating what you do, right? But a lot of what you do is more effective than what folks get at universities. It is clear that you do your homework, but it is clear that you don't do your homework in a manner that actually in the structure that they told you under which to do it. You took it together and said, I am going to add some critical thinking to it. And I think that is what makes your video so impactful.
Thank you. Well, I feel like cause and effect is the most important thing when you're talking about history, not memorizing dates, not memorizing names of people who necessarily accomplished or didn't accomplish certain things, but why we were in the position we were in, and then what happened because of the position we were in, and then what happened next. Like that's storytelling in a way. Teaching history is the same as filmmaking and storytelling.
Yeah, the other thing I like is before I go to this, the prisoners, because you are the one who taught me about the prisoners, something that I never heard of before. But before I go there, I want to point out that I talk a lot about economic systems and socialism, capitalism, and all the isms. And there are many times I'm methodical. And there's a video that you did. I don't know how recent it was, but that you kind of pointed out what end state capitalism is, but you did it in a manner that touched what people are going through right now, which I think is the most effective way of doing that, making that connection with what you're living and what is causal because of what you're living. How do you go about doing that? What's your impetus for doing that?
Well, I mean, there was just an article out this morning saying that rents in New York City are the most expensive that they've ever been. The average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in New York City now is $4,500.
Wow.
Why is that? Yes, New York City is one of the greatest cities in the world, but it's because nobody can afford to buy houses anymore. So we're all forced to rent. And then you start gathering roommates. So you've got 3 and 4 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment just to get by. That is a product of late stage capitalism. We have enough in this country. We have enough. There's no scarcity. There's plenty of space. There's plenty of food. We just don't want to share it. We just don't want to give it to each other. So that's why we end up with dumpsters full of food in the back of the Panera at the end of the day, because that turkey sandwich expired because no one wanted to give a piece of paper, an imaginary piece of paper or a shiny rock for that turkey sandwich. But you've also got somebody starving to death because they didn't have the right imaginary rock or piece of paper to exchange for that sandwich. Like, it's a crazy system we've created for ourselves. So when people start to really suffer financially, that's when you can start teaching some of these bigger lessons about late stage capitalism and money. What is money? That's man-made. It's all man-made. All this stuff that we're talking about is man-made. Crossing borders, it's man-made. We made that up. That's like not even a real thing. Again, that's deconstructing. I mean, that's maybe a whole nother topic.
No, but actually, I think it is so important the way you listed it, because again, think about it. That sandwich, they rather throw it out than actually make it at a price point where a lot of people can actually get it. That dumping of that food ensures that the price that there's some level of pricing that gives a certain level of profit. It is sad, but that is what we do now.
Or God forbid, give it away.
Or give it away. Now, one of the interesting things that I get from your channel as well is, and I don't know what makes you come up with this stuff, but you would just come up with something out of the blue, and it's informational. Then, like you and I were talking a couple of days ago, and the one thing you said is, "Hey, have you heard about the prisoners?" And I'm like, "Huh?" And it's like, that is something you should know about. I'm like, wow, I didn't know anything about it. And it just shows you how limited our history is. And I'm talking about all of us. The fact that you can come here and say, like, hey, there's this, there's that. And that is what's great about these platforms like TikTok or Instagram, used the right way. We use the collective knowledge of everybody to make our entire knowledge base individually much larger. Tell us a little bit about the prisoners and how did that come about?
Well, I'm a huge music fan, music buff. So I've toured the country going to see a variety of different music acts in different places. And I spent some quality time in Nashville, Tennessee. And I did the big museum, which is the Country Music Hall of Fame. And I ended up at this sort of small sub museum called the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And they had all these exhibits. I'm a big nerd, in case you haven't noticed. So I'm at this exhibit, and they're talking about Sun Records and all the people that recorded at Sun Records. And of course, they're most known for launching Elvis Presley. And there's this little plaque about this group called the Prisoners, and a photograph of 4 Black men in suits walking out of the Tennessee State Penitentiary. And it was an amazing image. I'm like, that really captured my interest. Now I'm down this rabbit hole. So I spent months researching the Prisonaires and Johnny Bragg. Johnny Bragg was the lead singer of the Prisonaires. He was born blind. His mother died when he was a kid. He was born in Nashville, Tennessee. He got arrested in 1943 when he was 16 years old after a fight with his girlfriend. And he was in jail for the night, supposedly cool off, go home, except the white prison guards and the white patriarchy, right? Everybody who's in charge of the penal code and the system in Tennessee had all of these open rape cases on their books. And here's this little kid who can barely read, a little bit of a, rough and tumble guy. And they say, we can cross all of these open cases off our books and stick them on this kid, Johnny Bragg. So he was convicted of 6 rape convictions, and sentenced to 99 years per case. Wow. Thrown into the Tennessee State Penitentiary to serve his 594 years. Now, this is the prison that Shawshank Redemption was shot at. They had that famous electric chair that they called Old Sparky. So here's this young kid, didn't do anything wrong, in jail with these hardened criminals, ostensibly for the rest of his life. And his job at the prison was to clean up after they had executed a prisoner on death row. So in an attempt to sort of disassociate from this horror that had become his life, he started singing. And the guys on the row on his block would complain about him because he would sing too loud. So he would take a bucket and put it over his head. And then he would get like the reverberation and the echo in the bucket. So it sounded really good to him, but nobody else in the prison could hear it as much. So he was like literally in his own little world singing. And he formed a little music group called the Prisonaires inside the prison. And then Frank Clement became the governor of Tennessee. This is a whole nother history lesson for another day. And he saw an opportunity to really promote prison reform with this group. So he would allow the Prisonaires to record albums and to leave the prison on day passes, and they would go out and sing at the governor's mansion. They went to Sun Records one day in 1945 and recorded a song, and guess who saw them there that day? Young Elvis Presley. And he fell in love with this group, and particularly Johnny Bragg, and they started a friendship. They sparked a friendship. Elvis would go to the Tennessee State Penitentiary in Nashville, and visit Johnny and advocate for him. How can I help you? How can I get you out? Johnny was eventually pardoned, but then he got rearrested for dating a white woman and was put back in prison. And he spent another 6.5 years in prison. And of course, all the financial and economic injustices that he suffered too. He did not have any ownership of the songs that he wrote. White people, made money off of his original songs that he wrote. His story is just ripe for a limited series. It's begging to be made into a limited series. That'll be my next project. But, these are all these American stories that are happening that aren't taught in our schools. We just don't know about them.
And imagine if we did. That story, when you told me about it, was like, wow, we hear the Elvis story, the Elvis Presley story, but we don't hear about all that got into or went into that story, So, like I said, that's why I love what you do. And I love your curiosity, the way you go out there and you find things. So let me tell you, Deborah, I always end my interviews with one particular question, and it goes this way. What should I have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Well, I guess what's next? Like, how do we fix all of this? Some of us are really good at identifying the issues that we as a society face. And some of us are gifted at pointing out how we got here. But what do we do about it? How do we move forward? One of my videos that went viral was about reparations, the 40 acres and a mule question. And people are still demanding reparations. But how do we do it moving forward? How do we fix the pickle that we've collectively gotten ourselves in? And it seems like people aren't asking that enough and working on it enough. People are more interested in blame and pointing the finger at whoever they think is responsible for where we are. But I think the big question that we should all be asking ourselves is, what are we individually going to do about it to contribute to this solution?
Well, I tell you what, I think you are doing a damn good job in doing your part in contributing to the solution, because I always think that an educated populace is a populace that can move forward. What our oligarchy depends on right now is a miseducation of people. That's why we're burning books. That's why we're up against wokeness and all these other issues. I hope we can keep this platform active, but whether it's active or not, your work will stand on its own. Deborah Rayne, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.